Those are moments that live in your mind forever.
The peaceful solution would be for Iraq to get out of Kuwait. That is a matter for them. We hope they will do it. If not, we shall have to take the military option and see that Iraq does leave Kuwait.
The Iraqis invaded in early August, and Margaret was Prime Minister until, well, she resigned at the beginning of November, and I replaced her, I think, on the 27th, 28th of November. So by then, some early preparation had been made, but a great deal still needed to be done. In determining what needs to be done in circumstances like this, you have to range a lot wider than the actual military strategy. It divides in half. There's a military strategy proposed by the military but approved by the government. And then there's the ancillary arrangements. If you're going to war, you need to make provision for casualties. You need to send nurses out. You need to send doctors out. You need to make arrangements for a whole series of things, including contact home and post. Was this war going to spread? Would Saddam Hussein attack Israel and try and bring Israel in the war in order to break up the Arab countries who were in the coalition opposing him? All of those were things that had to be considered. And of course, there were the things we most feared and that the servicemen most feared. And that was that Saddam Hussein had and might use chemical and biological weapons.
Saddam Hussein cannot win. We are trying to bring that point home to him so that we may settle this matter peaceably and he will go back into Iraq and leave Kuwait. We still hope that he will do that. If he doesn't, well, he knows what the consequences will be, and we will be looking to you and your colleagues in the forces out here to actually enforce those consequences.
How easy is it to sort of see quite clearly at this point when you're trying to navigate what is a very complex operation?
Well, your whole focus is on it. I mean, you don't suddenly have a meeting for an hour on Tuesday morning and then go away and forget it, despite other issues. It is actually in your mind every waking moment, and sometimes when you're asleep as well, frankly. And so you get very focused on it, and the more focused you get, the more you can spread out from the central core of what needs to be done to the ancillary matters that are very important to conducting a war properly. And of course, in parallel with that, there are the diplomatic moves to see whether a war can be avoided. War should be the last resort, not the first resort, because people are going to be injured and in some cases killed. And so there was a great deal of diplomatic activity as well. And it does consume an extraordinary amount of time when you prepare for something like this. Partial withdrawal is not acceptable. And partial withdrawal will have to be followed by expulsion until it becomes a full withdrawal. There is no compromise on that.
This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
Can you remember exactly how you felt?
Very vividly, and for a very special occasion. January the 16th, 1991, was my son's 16th birthday. And I had been out there to see the troops. Many of them were little older than my son. There were many there who were 18. The bulk of the troops to be involved in mainstream fighting were between 18 and 23. From my perspective, they were very young men indeed, and some of them still looked like boys. And I could superimpose my son's face on many of those young people, because another 2 years and he might have been there. And that made it very vivid and very personal. And I was also aware that whilst they were well prepared and trained for what they had to do, their families bore a great burden while they were there. The young man or woman may think we are immortal as young people do and we will get through it, it's a great adventure. But for their families at home, fearing what the outcome might be, not knowing about chemical and biological weapons, not knowing how powerful the Iraqi Republican forces really might have been, it was a harrowing and terrifying time for them.
I wish you could feel how strong that support is, because I think it would be a comfort. And I think to your husbands out in the Gulf, it certainly would be a great comfort to know the enormous support that they actually have. I hope this matter will not drag on for too long. I can't tell you how long it will be because I don't yet know, but I can reiterate just finally the promise that I made to you some time ago. When it is over, we will not delay in bringing your husbands back home to you.
Because of time differences, the bombing, which was the first 14, 15, 19 days of the campaign to degrade the Iraqi defences, was carried out from the air. And that started at midnight every night. I think I was up every night till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to see how it was going, and then back up awake again at 6 o'clock to see how it had gone. And some of my senior civil servants were up all night, night after night after night, because I think we're very conscious that older men and women send younger men and women to war. We may have to make the decision to go, but they bear the risk of being seriously injured, perhaps for life, or not returning at all. And yes, that does weigh on the mind. It can't not do so.
How do you maintain that level of focus and also the stress of that?
Well, mercifully, the war was quite short. It was only 5.5 weeks. So you can do it for that period of time, and you can sometimes grab a cat nap in the middle of the afternoon of an hour or so. How it was managed throughout the whole of the Second World War, which was a conflict on a wholly larger dimension in every respect, it's hard to look back and imagine. I was in the cabinet room with what the press rather glamorously called the war cabinet, when the IRA fired a mortar that, had it been a couple of foot higher, would have come straight through the window and undoubtedly killed or maimed half the people there at least. But it fell just short. But when it happened, we didn't know at that time or for a little while afterwards whether that was the IRA, which it did prove to be, or whether that was some ally or supporter of the Iraqis who were doing it.
But you evacuated the room and then continued the meeting 10 minutes later.
We evacuated the room and went downstairs. We had things to discuss. We were, in fact, discussing the conduct of the Iraq War. And
that, I guess, shows just how important it was to keep eyes on business.
Well, it does. I mean, we faced one mortar. They could have faced, and in many cases did face, things infinitely worse than that. In a curious way, I think the people who were there felt rather better that something like that had happened to them, because that was the sort of thing that was happening in spades and on a far larger scale to many people who were in theatre.
Does it feel like 30 years ago that this happened?
Well, that's very difficult to answer. When you look back on it, yes, it does seem a long time ago. When you focus on it, and on the people you met when I went out to the Gulf, and on the commanders who led the British forces out there, the memories are so vivid, it seems much closer. I remember standing on Challenger tanks and talking to literally hundreds of servicemen and women who were gathered round. I remember they were holding placards. "Hi, Mum, can I go home now? Am I paid enough for this?" And then talking to them privately. There were two things that were said to me then that I don't think I will ever forget. One, talking to some youngsters. These boys couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. I asked them how they felt. And there was a silence for a moment. And then one of them said, "It's our job. It's what we were trained for." And then I remember, after the conflict was over, going back and speaking to them again, when I made the most popular sentence I or any other Prime Minister has made for generations, which was simply, "You'll be home soon." And you could tell from the reaction that these young people had been through a great experience. Those who were there had come through it unscathed, and they now wish to go home to their families and their friends and their domestic life.